One of the giant copes when it comes to the gaming community is this idea that everything was somehow influenced by Ultima and Wizardry. This is something that keeps coming up and keeps getting mentioned when it comes to talking about how popular and influential games like Dragon Quest or Zelda are. Like, you always have these like 40-year-old man children who come in and just be like, well, actually, Ultima and Wizardry came first and they inspired a lot of the early JRPGs. Yes, that's true. But the simple fact of the matter is, Dragon Quest took the concept that Ultima established, uh, innovated on it, and became more popular and successful than it ever was. That is the simple reality of what we've been seeing over the past 40 years. It's true that Ultima and Wizardry came before Dragon Quest and The Legend of Zelda, but it is undeniable that Dragon Quest and The Legend of Zelda grew to be the definitive examples of video game fantasy. That's the simple reality of it. Nobody looks back and thinks of Ultima as like the defining classic when it comes to fantasy RPGs. Like, absolutely nobody does. They think of like Final Fantasy VI, or they think of like Pokemon, or they think of like any of these other far more culturally relevant, iconic things. Like, Ultima is just a curiosity of the early 80s. Okay, like, it is disingenuous to say that like Dragon Quest was, ripping it off, or that Ultima was somehow like, this major innovator, when really it's just a D&D kind of adaptation at its core. Like, something like Dragon Quest or Zelda innovated more in the video game format than Ultima did. And that's the simple reality of why these games are so iconic in the video game world, because they are actually IPs that were built for the ground up from the ground up for the video game industry, right? This doesn't rip off a ton of concepts from other formats, like D&D, like Tolkien. Like, they came up with their own unique iconography, their own unique universes, settings, ideas, gameplay mechanics, and that has been what has driven the video game industry for the past 40 years. Not Ultima, not Wizardry. Nobody cares about that slop. That's the simple reality of it, right? That's what we've been seeing over the past several decades, is that Zelda keeps reaching new and new heights, while every year a new Ultima fan dies of old age and AIDS. That's the simple fact of the matter. That the idea that people have that somehow like the video game industry inspired the Japanese one, it's just a giant cope. Like, it really does need to be understood, explained, and just straight up acknowledged that the Japanese industry is and always has been better than the Western one. There has been no point in its entire history where the Western PC video game industry was better or more successful than the Japanese one. And that's been like all the giant cope among Westerners, like, for decades now, is this idea that there was some secret like top high quality like niche video game market on gaming PCs, but in reality it was too expensive, too difficult to get into, and was built for a very niche audience, right? Like, you can find RPGs better than Ultima released on NES. Okay, you can find RPGs video games that far surpass PC gaming on Nintendo consoles, and there are just dozens and dozens of examples of this, right? Star Fox, of course, has remained way more relevant than Wing Commander, right? Like, and that's just one example, right? Like, it can't really be denied that all of the things that made PC gaming relevant at the time, like this idea that these were cool adult games made for adult gamers, like, people don't seem to understand that essentially amounted to having like voice acting and like FMV video, like, when you take those things away from it, when you look at the actual games, the simple fact of the matter is Dragon Quest and The Legend of Zelda were always better than Ultima right from the get-go. And I think with Final Fantasy, like Dragon Quest fans, it's very interesting how they handle it because I think a lot of Dragon Quest fans are willing to acknowledge that Final Fantasy, which took influence from Dragon Quest, the same way it took influence from Ultima and Wizardry. Final Fantasy like took Dragon Quest and was able to like grow and refine it into its own unique brand. And Dragon Quest fans kind of acknowledge that. You know, Pokemon took Dragon Quest ideas and evolved it in its own unique brand. You know, and Dragon Quest didn't stop being successful after that. It just had competition. But Ultima fans, you know, it couldn't handle any competition. You know, the simple fact of the matter is, outside of this illusion that Richard Garriott created like the greatest fantasy game in the world in history, like in the 80s, like when you take that away from it, like it really doesn't have anything that stands the test of time. Like the simple fact of the matter is, like whenever you talk about Ultima today, you're always going to end up talking about Spoonie. You know, that's the only time anybody younger than the age of 40 even will even hear about Ultima, is just like, well, Spoonie used to make those really good Ultima videos. Like the simple fact of the matter is, like, that was like 15 years ago. Okay. Like even the nostalgic bait and switch, like bait videos from some guy in it, like who grew up playing these games, like these older RPGs, even that is old and dusted now. Like Ultima just has not stood the test of time as a relevant video game IP because it simply did not continue past the 90s. Like the simple fact of the matter is, like even if Dragon Quest and The Legend of Zelda like took inspiration from Ultima, like Zelda didn't, but like Dragon Quest did. Like even if like these games were inspired by these old Western RPGs, the simple fact of the matter is that they outlasted them for a very good reason. Is that they stayed consistently high quality, that they got regular new releases, that they kept innovating and doing new things, and meanwhile, what Ultima fans have done for the past 40 years is just sit with their thumb up their ass, like, did you know that we came first? Like, unbelievable. It is unbelievably cringe how this keeps coming up and keeps needing to get addressed. That this needs to keep getting called out. Like Dragon Quest was just better than Wizardry. Dragon Quest was just better than Ultima. And it is high time that we as fans of RPGs really start calling this out because Skyrim wasn't shit, Baldur's Gate 3 wasn't shit. Like these Western RPGs pale in comparison to the far superior Japanese ones. And this is very apparent to anybody who has ever spent any amount of time playing Japanese games at all. The Western RPG thing is a complete and total cope.